Well, look at this. Every vote is being recounted in New York City, not to determine who won this week's primary in the race for mayor, but whether or not the winner on the Democratic side at least has enough votes to prevent a runoff next month. The New York City mayoral primary ongoing. Let's take a look.
Bill de Blasio is well positioned to become the city's next mayor, but it could take some time before he's the official Democratic nominee. That's because de Blasio is flirting with the 40% threshold it takes to avoid a one-on-one runoff against his closest opponent, Bill Thompson, the former city comptroller. According to unofficial tallies of 97% of the counted vote, de Blasio has 40.2% of the vote and Thompson has 26%. Thompson faces a difficult decision whether to stay in the race. On his victory speech, de Blasio said,
"That day we said that New York had become a tale of two cities. One where the very wealthy had not only rebounded from the Great Recession, but where life couldn't get much better for them. And we acknowledged that day that there was another New York, a New York where nearly half our citizens are living at or near the poverty line."
On the Republican side, former MTA CEO Joe Lhota won over New York City's Gristedes supermarket owner and billionaire John Katsimatidis, 52% to 41%. The Democratic race marked a stinging defeat for former Congressman Anthony Weiner and early favorite City Council Speaker Christine Quinn. Quinn couldn't save herself from the association with the current New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg and some of his policies, including the stop and frisk policy. Weiner, once a front-runner until his sexting scandals, finished with just about 5% of the votes. Another former New York politician seeking redemption from scandal, former Governor Weiner Spitzer, narrowly lost his bid for New York City Comptroller to Scott Stringer. Stringer currently serves as Manhattan Borough President. Exit polls suggest that if de Blasio crosses the 40% mark or defeats Thompson in a runoff, he will be the only candidate to beat Lhota in the November election, thanks in large part to the large voting advantage Democrats have in New York City.
I am so proud of this victory.
Well, the New York City mayoral primary to determine who the winner will be was a real scrum, as we were talking about during the commercial. The candidates at one time taking and then losing the lead in the polls, including, of course, our favorite, former Congressman Anthony Weiner. Joining us this segment is media analyst, and I'm joking so when I'm saying that, Jackie Guzda is here. She's a communications and professor at Western Connecticut State University. Also communications specialist Bruno Tedeschi, and staying in her seat, Republican strategist Dee Dee Benkie. Well, you know, de Blasio really surprised at the end. For a while there, Christine Quinn was leading. Then we had Congressman Weiner, former Congressman Weiner leading. And the lead sort of went back and forth. And then de Blasio sort of continued to build on his lead. And it looks as though he might not have a runoff based on... Was that a surprise to you? It was a surprise to me, quite frankly.
It was a surprise, but here's what de Blasio did. He gave those citizens of New York City a voice. People were tired of Bloomberg. Yes, they liked the way he micromanaged the city. However, if you look around the city, there were more condos going up, more high-rises. It became, in de Blasio's words, a tale of two cities. The rich, the poor, the haves, the have-nots. So he gave us voice to how we were feeling. And then number two, he showed he not only talked the talk, but he walked the walk. Because they had those surprise commercials at the end when his mixed-race son, Dante, came on. And he comes on and pretends that he's just a normal kid, black kid who would get stopped and frisked and all that. And then we're surprised. He goes, I would vote for him even if he wasn't my dad.
Well, let's take the first point. Was it a miscalculation for Christine Quinn and some of the other candidates to associate themselves with Bloomberg? Did they misread the public, and the public was done with Bloomberg? They had it with Bloomberg.
First of all, we're talking about a race which 22% of the this is a Democratic primary.
Yes.
So to attach yourself to Bloomberg in a Democratic primary is
so
never a good strategy.
So why would you do that?
Well, she had no choice. She supported him throughout her term on the council as council president in New York City. So she really couldn't run away from him. I mean, she really was.
But some other candidates did, and they really had no association with him.
She was tied to the hip with Bloomberg, you know, in order for Bloomberg to get anything done in New York City, she had to lead the charge for him, and you can't then step away from that. So she really had a major problem in that sense. Now you're running in a Democratic primary in New York City, where you have an extremely liberal voter base. And how do you then run away from that?
Again, how do you misread that? How do you?
It's not a matter. Well, I don't think it's a matter of
why could she not distance herself a little more? She clearly had been running over the leg.
She could have. Look, I mean, they may have worked together. He said she could have said, well, you know what? I'm really not happy now with what's going on. This is what I like. This is what I don't. So I think she could have, but I think she did miscalculate, and she thought it would be okay.
Well, clearly they misread the tea leaves.
Sure.
I think a lot of the candidates misread the tea leaves. I think even when Mayor Koch ran for the 4th time, people had Koch fatigue at that point. I think a candidate for mayor in New York City and a mayor for New York City, after 12 years, no matter how good or bad you are, they want you gone.
Absolutely.
Well, they want change.
They want change.
That's what changed.
Exactly.
That's what beat her.
And that's what.
Well, why? Again, I go back to the initial question. Why didn't the candidates see that change was necessary and try to say, hey, that we're going to turn the page here?
Because you can't run as the change agent when you're essentially running as the incumbent. That was her problem. She was essentially running as
putting Christine Quinn aside. Some of the other candidates who sort of fell and rose and fell, you know, they didn't say that we're done with Bloomberg, we're turning the page. I never heard them really say that.
They didn't say that out loud, but they definitely dissed themselves.
But why wouldn't you say that out loud if you want to be mayor? I would have said, hey,
no, look,
we're closing the book.
No, what they did is they brought up stop and frisk. Everybody was against stop and frisk.
Yes.
They said, we're going to fire Ray Kelly, except for Christine Quinn. They went through the whole, you know, every single little thing that happened in New York, St. Vincent's, the carriage horses, and distanced themselves.
Well, and de Blasio was best at capturing that stop and frisk, and then when you bring the son up, Dante the rock star.
Yeah,
you know, it just sealed the deal.
Well, you bring up, I don't see that as a major turning point. You do.
Well, Quinnipiac did a poll, and right after they released those ads, de Blasio just shot up in the polls.
Well, is it because America as a whole is more comfortable with an interracial situation? We look at Obama and we say, hey, we've elected an interracial president. Does it matter? Was that ever a factor? Or did it help him that, you know, he saw the city in a different way because he had a son?
Sure, he got the black vote.
Yeah, I think
all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure. I mean, which is, you know, look, if you overproduce in an area, I mean, you can win, and that's how he did it.
And he won in almost every demographic.
Absolutely, and I think this just points to the fact that urban politics, New York City politics, is still very racially based. Christine Quinn didn't have a base. She's an Irish woman. I think the gay vote was overestimated. She just didn't have a base the same way that Bill de Blasio had a base, and even Bill Thompson had a base.
And she didn't even mention anything about being gay until sort of the end.
Well,
I
think
talk about it.
She didn't talk about it.
That was no.
It's obvious.
Yeah,
I mean, people knew that she was.
But going back, if I may, to the original question, why was de Blasio able to plug into this need for New Yorkers to A, turn the page, and B, feel like they're being taken care of? Because he almost spoke to the 99% during that campaign. And he said Bloomberg is the 1%. Even those commercials toward the end where he's in the diner saying, hey, you know, Wall Street is getting richer, the condos are going up on Park Avenue, and they're not taking care of the people.
But look, if you listen to every single Democratic candidate, they all said the same thing. We are you. We are part of the middle class. Everybody talked about how they went to school in Brooklyn or their kids went to public school. They were identifying with us. I think they knew we had it with the Bloomberg
All right,
years.
let's talk about, jokingly, our favorite candidate, Congressman Weiner, who absolutely imploded and self-destructed, and why you would do this, I don't know. My question to you, Bruno, is you know you have post-disgrace emails out there as Carlos Danger. Right. Why do you lay yourself out there knowing eventually that would come up? Why would you do something like that?
Well, you know, in any time you're running as a candidate for any office, you do opposition research, and not only on the other candidates, but a good candidate would do it on themselves. And I can't imagine that at this level in New York City that he didn't have people who did the opposition research on him and said, "Whoa, wait a second, what is this thing?"
But he knew it.
He knew it exactly. Did he tell his campaign that before they went into this? And I don't think they did, because
the campaign manager left right after.
Exactly.
He's like, I'm out.
So they didn't. His own campaign. This was a surprise to his own campaign, which is never a good thing. And at that point, when those texts became public, he should have dropped out. And he turned this.
Of course.
It became he turned this into a circus.
And every day he stayed in made it worse because he embarrassed himself.
But he was winning to begin with, though.
That's right.
He was in the lead.
I thought he was going to win.
Me too. Absolutely.
One thing you've got to say for Weiner is that he's scrappy. He's a fighter, and he showed that. He stayed in until the end.
And I think most people forgave him
Up until
that point. When
Up to
Carlos
this point.
Danger emerged, that's when people said
Look,
he's
the
got a
Indiana
problem.
girl took him down. I mean, admit it. I mean, and that was bad, but there were the optics there. It just really killed him.
Yeah.
It did.
You know, how I felt was that he not only embarrassed himself, he embarrassed us.
He did.
The people of the city of New York.
He did. I agree
Yeah.
with you, Jack. Let's talk about the Elliot Spitzer. Boy, here's a guy, ton of money, former governor. He wants to run for comptroller, which isn't exactly a high-profile position, but maybe he's planning a return to the governor's office. Who knows? And he's knocked off by, when I was a reporter years ago, 20 years ago, I covered Scott Stringer. He's been around forever. He was knocked off by a career politician. How does that happen?
Thank goodness it happened. I think
Yeah.
people really took a look at this guy as a dirtbag and said that they do not want them to be comptroller. Nobody ever thought about what comptroller
But
is.
nothing came up after that. It wasn't like Weiner, where he had more.
Yes.
Let's look at the vote. It was a 52-48 vote.
Yeah, so
it
it was
wasn't.
close.
It wasn't that people rejected him. It was a close race, and I think he ran a pretty good campaign considering his baggage, and in terms of addressing the controversy that for the reasons why he left office, he dealt with it early on in the race, and he didn't answer any questions, and it never came up again.
Well, Bruno, does that say as New Yorkers we're smarter than they think we are?
Yeah.
I think
That
so.
we didn't buy Spitzer this time around?
I don't know. I think 48% of the Democratic voters out there thought he might.
But he lost.
But
He
he
lost,
lost.
but it wasn't by a big
Good.
margin. I think it's more pronounced with Weiner than it was with Spitzer. I think people were more willing to forgive Spitzer than they were Weiner.
I don't think so.
I think they were more willing to forgive Weiner.
I agree.
Up until Carlos Danger emerged.
Exactly.
At that point,
Because
he might
he was
have won.
winning.
He
He
might
would've
have
won.
won had that not happened. Do you
Yeah,
agree?
I think so. I was so afraid that Scott Stringer wasn't going to win because, you know, Spitzer had the name recognition. He was the celebrity.
And the money.
And the money in this case.
Well, how do you explain somebody like Stanford, the former governor of South Carolina? He gets into a problem, similar problem.
Bright
He's
red state, though.
walking along
That's
the
why.
Appalachian. He says that he has been, you know, Jesus has forgiven him, and that's all. And then he wins again. How do you figure that happens there, but it can't happen here?
Well, I think another example closer to New York would be Governor Jim McGreevey, who resigned 10 years ago in a sex scandal.
Yes.
And he actually, around the same time, also emerged back into the public eye. Not a high-profile job, but he's now working in Jersey City
Yes.
basically as a bureaucrat. And so the path for his redemption was 10 years. Before he actually came back into the public eye, and it's certainly not a high profile. Elliot Spitzer and Weiner, they try to get back into this just
Very
too quickly.
quickly. Yeah.
They,
Very
they
quickly.
needed to redeem themselves a little bit more, and they didn't do it.
Good point. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. We thank you very much, the entire panel, for this really spirited debate about the mayoral election. It's been knocking around in my head over the last week or so, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk about that. Thank you. Next up, we go around the horn with our panel, our version of the lightning round, as we tackle several different issues that made headlines this week, including, of course, a look back at the anniversary of 9/11. We'll be right back.